Musician Prince serves as the blueprint of an amazing artistic career and how we can conduct ourselves as artists. But he also represents how we can handle our business to make sure that we have a legacy well beyond ourselves. In fact, there's certain lessons from him that we are still using today, many years after him passing away. First lesson is to make sure you know your music rights, your intellectual property rights, and make sure you keep them because they are naturally your rights. We go back to when Prince signed his contract back in the late 70s, around the time I was born. There was no SoundCloud, there was no YouTube, there was no mixtape revolution as I saw later on in the 90s and the aughts when I was around. Instead, if you wanted to get your music played on mainstream folks, you had to go through the radio. Who on the radio? The major distributors and the major publishers. So he really didn't have much of a choice but to sign that deal. But when he started getting big with the album Controversy, and then had another breakthrough with 1999, but particularly when he hit with Purple Rain, having the #1 movie and the #1 album at the exact same time. I think he was the first person to do that. Then suddenly he realized the numbers weren't adding up. He didn't have as much control over his brand as he thought.
You can put out a record. SoundScan refuses to count as many as they actually sell. Meanwhile, when you go overseas and you check some of the barcodes and titles over there, they've already ripped you off. Also, the influx of the internet, those sales. So we never really knew what Purple Rain sold. I don't know to this date. I only know what they tell me.
So being at that time #1 artist arguably in the world, he started a protest. He went as far as to write "slave" on his face, which if you're around at that time, it was a striking and intense thing to happen. He was able to fight his way out of that contract and start doing independent work. But that fight itself ended up inspiring his peers, such as George Michael, who was going through the same type of thing as an 80s artist going into the 90s, as recently as Kanye West trying to get out of their contracts and get their masters back, which is their intellectual property. Up until his death, he became an advocate for the indie hustle. And someone like myself, who I own my own publishing company, I'm talking to you on my own TV station, he's been an inspiration for that as far as protecting our intellectual property rights. The second thing is connecting directly to your consumer. Now, this isn't that unusual. If you think of like the Grateful Dead back in the 60s, 70s, 80s until they disbanded, all the way up to more recent acts. Connecting and, selling it out of the trunk, as they used to say, when you're selling your CDs or whatever out of the trunk, that's actually not a new thing. However, Prince was different because he leveraged technology and he happened to be in the age where we could do so. So he was one of the first music artists to have a regular newsletter/email list, and he was definitely one of the first mainstream artists to actually sell music directly from his website. We're talking years before Spotify. We're talking about before the founder of Spotify probably was even born. So doing that hand-to-hand directly aesthetic, where you're connecting directly to your audience, and as a result of that, you're actually making more of the money because there's not the middleman there.
Crystal Ball sold upwards of 200,000 copies at $50 a pop. 200,000 copies by industry standards would be a failure, but when you take the lion's share of the profit.
Number 3, it's about taking the audience not where they say they want to go, but where they need to go. Now think about it. In 1983, 1984, 1985, Prince was arguably the biggest artist in the world. Again, had the #1 movie and the #1 album at the exact same time. And then what did he do? He did Under a Cherry Moon, which was this unusual album and even stranger movie, but had these classics on there, like Kiss, and my personal favorite, Sometimes It Snows in April. Totally different than the tune, literally, of Purple Rain. Then we have Around the World in a Day. But then later on you have Diamonds and Pearls, Sign of the Times, one of the most unusual albums to come out at that period of time, and that was just a few years after Purple Rain. The point is that you have to know where your audience needs to go and then take them there. However, if you ask your audience, particularly after a hit, what they want next, they're going to say a sequel. If you ask me what I want after Purple Rain, I'd say more Purple Rain. But instead he gave us something different.
You'll hear a lot of talk about, will he ever match the success of such and such and such and such? I'm not on that road.
As a creator, as an artist, if you're going to be moving the cultural needle, you need to move your audience to where they're slightly uncomfortable because you're meeting them in the future. The next approach is to disrupt the game. Understand the rules well enough so that you can challenge the system. Now, Prince was a fellow prodigy. In fact, I think he learned about 30 or so instruments. The rumor is that in his first couple of albums, he actually played all the instruments but used overdubbing. He was also an artist coming up in the 70s. And if you were around in the 70s and you wanted a major commercial hit, or if you even wanted to get on the radio, you had to go through a major label. The independent outlets weren't happening as they are now with Apple Music and Spotify and all these different things. The internet wasn't even around yet. So he ended up signing a deal with Warner Brothers. The funny thing is that if he was around today, he probably would have produced things himself. But he was at a period of time where that didn't quite make sense for the directions he wanted to go in, financially or otherwise. Now, this seemed like a good decision at the time, but then he started to chafe under the corporation known as Warner Brothers. The first problem was that he was extremely prolific. If you're in a traditional system, there's only so much music or content you can put out. I understand that from the book publishing industry. And so there's going to be limitations as far as how quickly you can get things out, because there needs to be a marketing campaign. They need to make sure that the money's right. They need to do the research and development, audience testing, advertising, all those different things that big corporations do. The second part of it, which is even more concerning, is that they actually didn't allow him to have ownership of the things he created. In other words, he didn't own his masters, which is intellectual property. So if someone wanted to use his song in a commercial, or if someone wanted to do something else with his song, then he didn't have the permission or even have to be notified that those things were happening because he didn't own that. And then Purple Rain happened. When he started getting big with the album Controversy, and then had another breakthrough with 1999, but particularly when he hit with Purple Rain, having the #1 movie and the #1 album at the exact same time. I think he was the first person to do that. Then suddenly he realized the numbers weren't adding up. He didn't have as much control over his brand as he thought. So he did two really smart moves to get out of that situation and to prosper from it. The first move he did was that he made his feud or issue with Warner Brothers public. He said, listen, they're not allowing me to release this beautiful music that I created for y'all because they don't want me to put out so much music. They're not allowing me to own the things that I created for y'all that I did with my own little hands. And by making it public, then he got the public on his side as far as his audience, but he also was able to inform artists like myself as far as the issues with these contracts. That also put Warner Brothers on the spot because then the audience and the artists became more mad at them. But once he got out of the contract, that's where the real power play happened. Galvanized that audience. And suddenly, he had this system in place, this new system, through taking advantage of the internet, being one of the first artists to create their own website, having an email newsletter where you can connect to fans, even selling music directly from his website, CDs and everything, and making a lion's share of the profit.
Crystal Ball sold upwards of 200,000 copies at $50 a pop. 200,000 copies by industry standards would be a failure, but when you take the lion's share of the profit.
In other words, he ended up disrupting the system and then creating his own system. Understand the rules well enough so that you can challenge the established system. You can also overpower the game. Create enough buzz.
I was 16. I was completely broke and needed to go get a job, so I got the Yellow Pages out and I couldn't find one thing that I wanted to do. So I decided I was going to push as hard as I could to be a musician and win at it. I'm painting, whatever. I want to be able to sell that, for all of time. You can rent it, you can borrow it, for a little bit. We can all get paid from it, but then, as long as you own your work, it's cool. Ownership of the master, or else you're a slave. I don't mind fans singing the songs. My problem is when the industry covers the music. A lot of times people think I'm doing Sinead O'Connor's song,
right,
and Shaka Khan's song, yes, when in fact I wrote those songs. And it's okay when my friends ask to do them, but there's this thing called the compulsory license law, which allows artists through the record companies to take your music at will without your permission, and that doesn't exist in any other art form. It's obvious now that artists are supposed to own their master recordings. I mean, in the future, it'll be unconscionable to even think you can take somebody's creation and claim ownership of it. It's helped the people who sell the music. For an artist, they don't make the money they used to. And I think we tend not to value things we can get for free.
Right.
If you put anything in the place of music and say you got it for free, you'll see what I'm talking about. You'll hear a lot of talk about will he ever match the success of such and such and such and such? I'm not on that road. You can put out a record. SoundScan refuses to count as many as they actually sell. Meanwhile, when you go overseas and you check some of the barcodes and titles over there, they've already ripped you off. Also, the influx of the internet, those sales. So we never really knew what Purple Rain sold. I don't know to this day. I only know what they tell me. Purple Rain and that whole situation, Thriller, that whole situation, Like a Virgin, that whole situation. I mean, that was a time period. And it's our journey, you know. It's not for somebody who doesn't play music to step up and say, you know, that's not as good as. I write so much because it is therapy for me. You're evolving your spirit, actually. Every time you go back into the well, and the more I write, the more stuff I put out, the quicker I get to my destination. My father left his piano at the house when he left. I wasn't allowed to play it when he was there because I wasn't as good as him. When he left, I was determined to get as good as him. We learn like that. We learn from being shown. It doesn't come from books and just reading it. We need to be shown. Miles Davis was a friend when he was alive, and he was a wonderful mentor and really, really funny. Could critique something you've done by humor, you know, and out of love. Early in my career, I tried to compensate for that by being as flashy as I could and as noisy as I could.
Risque stuff and want to separate yourself from it?
Well, you know, when you're 20 years old, you're looking for the ledge. You know, you want to see how far you can push everything. As an artist, I just went there just to find it. Creating your own universe is the key to it, I believe, and letting all the people that you need occupy that universe. The lyrics to When Doves Cry was, dig if you will the picture of me, Marvin Gaye, and the kids. Swore up and down, little red Corvette was pay the rent, collect.
Yeah. Isn't it nice to celebrate the day you was born?
I'll celebrate the day I die.
Because you're going to move on to the next path in life.